I experienced states of expanded states of consciousness, letting go of patterns, understanding why I did certain things, ecstasy in my body, seeing, the capacity of creative life force for transformation. And I just thought, why isn't the whole world doing this?
KarmaHub, sharing the spirit of the healing arts. So you are currently the director of Global Professional Breathwork Alliance, the founding director of Inspiration Consciousness School, and the author of Breathwork and Psychotherapy, Clinical Applications for Healing and Transformation. I've actually got a copy of it right here. It's fantastic.
An honor to be with you, Lauren, and I just want to really acknowledge you for your contribution to the world, that you're trying to bring some awareness, some tools, some benefits that people can have for growing themselves and being healthy. So thank you for inviting me onto your show.
Absolutely. There's so many methods out there that people just aren't that familiar with. They're so helpful that I feel like people need to know. And breath work is part of that. So I'd love to hear what kind of puts you on this journey. What put you on this path? Can you kind of go from, I guess, the beginning and give us a little background?
Well, thank you. I just think, as I'm going to say a little bit of the journey that led me to this, of how every human being has a very unique journey. And I think that is part of what set me on mine, is that from a very young age, I could see in my parents, my earliest memories of my parents were seeing how beautiful they were and how much they had to give to the world, and that they had these tremendous gifts, and that at the core of both of them was the desire to love and to be loved, but more than that, to be love itself. And then I could also see that there was fear. Both of them were carrying fear that was from messages that they had received, experiences that they'd had, that they had sort of tightened up around, feeling that they wouldn't be supported fully if they were their most authentic self. I don't know how it is that I saw these things at such a young age, but these are in my very first memories. And I remember feeling that I wanted to find a way to help them unlock this incredible potential of love that was inside of them. And so my journey went through, I first was just really trying to be a good girl. I wanted to be a good girl. I wanted to bring love into the home. I wanted to be kind. I wanted to be kind to my brother, and then eventually my sister and other siblings. And yet I could see that somehow that wasn't enough. There was like another level. We have a saying in one of the segments of breath work, they used to say that love brings up anything unlike itself, and meaning that when we're in the presence of love, the parts of us that are scared or unhealed or don't know exactly what our true purpose is kind of come up, because they're in a safe environment now, and they can come up and sort of be like, I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm whatever. And so I think that what I noticed was I was really trying to bring kindness, but it didn't always bring out kindness in others, because it stirred up things inside of them that would come out. And so I was curious about that. And I thought, well, there must be something else. And when I was 5 years old, my mother took me to see the Royal Danish Ballet at an outdoor performance in New Hampshire.
Oh, wow.
And it was the most beautiful thing I thought I had ever seen in my life. And I decided to become a dancer, because I thought, well, ballet and dance is what will bring the beauty to the world, that will help everybody feel inspired to be this love and these gifts that they are. By the time so I took it very seriously. My parents let me move to New York when I was 12 to a very special school there. And I got to dance at Lincoln Center. And, it was a privilege of a lifetime to dance with the Royal Ballet from England and the Bolshoi. And I really, really loved it. And I was aware by the time I was about 15 that it just wasn't going to reach enough people. It wasn't going to touch enough people. It would only touch some because it was a particular culture. And so, even though it was very hard for me and very painful to leave that world, I did leave to go find something else. And one of the things that I searched in was yoga. And I went into a very disciplined, focused yoga lineage that was based on the really ancient principles of the Tamil Yoga Siddhas and Southern India and thousands of years. And we did hours and hours of practice a day. And one of the things that we did a lot of was pranayama, breathing practices. And
Hmm.
so by the
Okay.
time I was maybe 17, I already knew that those breathing practices could bring energy, help induce sleep, cool me down, heat me up, help me focus. I knew that there were techniques for helping with respiratory illnesses, with blood pressure, with varying ailments. And so I was very excited about that. But I also could see that even with that, yoga wasn't going to speak to everybody because there's a certain culture that goes along with yoga. And I think that somehow without realizing it, I was drawn to the idea of a universal key, something that would be unifying for everybody and that would be accessible to everybody. And so I thought, well, I'll go to medical school, I'll get a degree. I loved medicine anyway, I loved healthcare. And I thought if I have the degree, then I'll be able to teach people about breathing in a more, non sectarian, like it'll just be very accessible to each person. And I was on the verge of going to medical school when I was in a dilemma because I had a 2-year old at that point, and I really felt that being there for that 2-year old was the most important time of his life. And I didn't want
Right.
to be in the long hours of medical school. And in the middle of that dilemma, I had been working with a holistic psychologist who had learned about breath work. And I had gone to him because I wanted to do sort of my next stage of growth. And I will never forget my very first breath work session, which was of deeper than the pranayama that I had been doing. And I knew in that moment that all the things that I've been searching for, contact with the person's most deep gifts, most special and precious gifts, contact with their potential, contact with their authentic self rather than the one that they wanted to present to the world. The ability to heal from trauma, the ability to let go of things that were those fears I had seen in my parents in my early days. It all came together in that one breathwork session. I experienced states of expanded states of consciousness, letting go of patterns, understanding why I did certain things, ecstasy in my body, seeing, the capacity of creative life force for transformation. And I just thought, why isn't the whole world doing this? And it was right about that time that the psychologist came to me and said, I've been looking for someone to train in this method for about 2 years. And I think you might be that person. And I just felt that knowing, that happens to you that I'm not going to go to medical school. I'm going to be doing this instead. And so what I discovered, Lauren, was that I came to experience that conscious breathing, breath work, was a universal medicine that belonged to everybody because we're all breathing, that could be accessed at any moment free if one knew how to be connected to it, that it's the
Mhm.
medicine and the nutrients of the people of the world, of the creatures of the world itself. And I became very excited about having people have access to it and having training people that could be coaches and facilitators for it to journey with people to those very deepest parts of who they actually are instead of who they think they should be. And so that is how I came to this and became very interested in elevating our understanding of the transformative power of breath work psychologically, physiologically, and spiritually, and having facilitators, therefore, that had deep training in psychodynamic understanding, in spiritual and consciousness understanding, in physiological process, in regulation, and also having practitioners who understood the importance of ethical principles in the way that they were working with these people, that each person's journey is so sacred and so special and so sovereign. And so we need to have the utmost care, especially when you're working with somebody's innermost beauty, innermost potential, to have the ethical understanding of the way to orient towards that person, how to have that optimal connection and optimal respect for who they are and not who we want them to be. And so all of those things just sort of compelled me to do a lot of study, a lot of practice, a lot of breathwork sessions, a lot of study of academically of many different disciplines, and as well as many different kinds of healing modalities, and ultimately to come to this place where I felt like if people understood the power of the therapeutic benefit of breath work, it could be a game changer for our world.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. So I want to back up just a little bit. When you were actually studying to be a physician, I found it very interesting that so some of your patients were developing respiratory illness after surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And so you had the initiative. I don't know where I'd love to know where you came up with this, but to have them blow into, basically like the rubber gloves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and with that, it kind of it brought those issues to a halt practically in the unit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you had a knack for this even before this other person kind of brought you in under their arm. And I had that quote here. I just that very so I've been listening to some of your podcasts, right? And that really moved me. It says, I've been waiting for you for 2 years to find someone to work with. And I think you're that person.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's just awesome. That must have just been kind of like a whole jaw dropping, like, this is what I've been looking for.
My whole life. My whole life. Yes.
That's so awesome. So I took your 8-week program about 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple things. Well, one, it was at that program that I actually spoke of KarmaHub for the first time. Um, I had been kind of working in the arts, so to speak, for a couple years. I was very fascinated by it all, and I still am. But it was at your program where I actually started talking to it about other people, like, hey, I want to put together this thing that promotes these different healing practices. And that's when I kind of reconnected with you, I remember that occurrence. And I think that's just really cool that you had a very large part of, kind of starting this whole thing that I'm doing, my passion project.
Mm-hmm.
The first day I was there at your workshop, we were breathing in, I guess we were working with the root chakra, and I was breathing in the color red. And for whatever reason, I just had a meltdown, and I was bawling. It wasn't something. I mean, I guess these kind of breakthroughs absolutely happen in your courses, but in that moment, I was the only person doing it, and it was the first night, and I was just breathing in red, and I kind of fell apart, and all this stuff kind of unfolded. A couple of days later, I think I had told you, I reached out to my ex-wife and I said, hey, we need to, chat. I'd love to have dinner with you and chat. And a couple of days after that, we did. And, we had a very long needed, meaningful, heartfelt chat that resolved many issues between us, which was important because we share a son.
Mm-hmm.
And I even kid with her at that dinner table. I said, this is all happening because of this course that I took. That's so fantastic. And I believe I was breathing in the color red. you know, but it's so interesting how this works. I mean, how does this happen? How do these breathing exercises get you to open up and remove blocks
Mhm.
and heal trauma in your body? Can you speak on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, that's something that could be, a week-long seminar because there's so many different aspects to it. There's the science, the physiology, the philosophy, the energetic piece of it, the cosmological piece of it. I mean, there's just so many pieces, the emotional part. But let's see how much of that we can visit in a few minutes. So you and I and everybody else is wired. We are all wired to breathe and to love. Babies will love their parents, even when their parents don't treat them well. It's just there's an innate desire in us to be bonded to love. And it's the primary thing right along with we're wired to breathe. Like no breathe, no live. Like we have to do that. It's breathing is literally physiologically and from a consciousness perspective, that breath is the connection between whatever it is that we are and wherever we are before we take that first breath and being here. And the same thing, of course, at the end of life, right? So in our neural pathways, breathing is one of the very earliest memories. Of course, we know there are prenatal memories now. And we also know that prenatally, babies are moving in patterns that resemble breathing. There's a movement that goes with the chest and the opening like this, and there are the beginnings of respiratory movement, even in the womb. So that taking that first breath or receiving that first breath or being breathed, like I like to say,
Mm-hmm.
that first breath is really such a seminal memory in our neural pathways that every time we breathe, so every other memory is going to be built upon that. And every time we breathe consciously, we are therefore connecting with that very primal, very seminal, foundational memory of the connection between form and formlessness, the connection between, if you will, soul and psyche or soul and soma, the connection between spirit and body. And what that affords us, therefore, is when we breathe consciously, we are contacting what Dr. Dan Siegel likes to call the plane of possibility, or physicists call the quantum sea of potential. We are contacting what some people would call the divine, some people would call the creative life force. And if we can learn to consciously breathe, therefore, in the presence of anything else that arises as part of our human life, love, fear, pain, pleasure, anger, rage, grief, joy, creativity, thought patterns, physical sensations, illness, health, all of it, our reactions to things. If we can learn to consciously breathe while we are experiencing any of those human experience, part of our human journey, we're bringing presence. We're bringing the plane of possibility. We're bringing essence, you might say. We're bringing the creative life force in contact with our experience. And what that means is that rather than identifying solely with what we might call ego or what we might call a fear-based self, we are bringing that initial drive to breathe and to love in contact with our human journey. And so we can now be with that fear or that anger or that desire to write a book or whatever, or to do a podcast, to become a podcast person. We're bringing the unconditioned plane, the sort of the before the fear, before the contractions, before the, any limitations, we're bringing that to whatever it is that we either need to heal or whatever it is that we need to develop and grow. And so it's a game changer. It really, I don't think I'm being and exaggerating when I say that brings the possibility of a kind of quantum level of living, shall we say, to us. And so when we breathe consciously, we are going to have our autonomic nervous system is going to get more regulated, especially if we're breathing slowly and deeply. That science has been replicated many times, it's irrefutable. Every breath is psychophysiological. That science has also been, it's irrefutable that every single breath is originating from some part of our psychological experience and some part of our physiological experience, and also affects our psychological experience and our physiological experience.
Okay.
When we breathe consciously, we're bringing awareness to our somatic sensations. And we know that memory and feelings and trauma and potential are now cellularly encoded. They're in the muscles, they're in the cells. So when we're breathing in a way that we are present to our sensations, we're accessing both the wisdom and the parts that need healing and tending to, and we're changing brain waves. We're accessing those deeper brain waves that are not frenetically being run by everyday consciousness or the highly adrenalized way that we have of living. And so in that plane of awareness, in that plane of willingness, in that plane of openness, all kinds of healing and contacting these deep potentials can take place. And that's what happened for you. I did experience you as very open. And I thought it was quite beautiful that that happened for you the very first night. It set a tone
It
for
did.
the rest of the class. And
Okay.
yeah, and I see those kinds of experiences. I had an experience like that the first time I ever did breath work, and
Oh,
many people do. I think many people in their first session are very surprised by how much they contact their emotional self and also the sense of feeling more embodied than they have, less dissociation, more presence, more capacity.
have you experienced any like spontaneous healing? I mean, what I experienced was, I guess, a form of that, right? I got rid of a block or some emotional
Mm-hmm.
baggage was released. Can you
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about some spontaneous healing that maybe you were a part of or you were able to witness?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, it's a wonderful question. I'm so glad you want to go to these dimensions. And I also want people to know that it doesn't mean that if you don't have a spontaneous healing, something's
Right.
wrong, because there's an inner guidance that, when we tap pure presence in ourselves, each of us is a highly individual expression, shall we say, of life, of the creative life force. And so what one person may need to experience will be very different than from what another person needs to experience. So, but yes, absolutely. Some of the ones that come to mind. Well, I'll save one of the most incredible for the very last thing I'll share. So first, let me say for myself, I had had chronic tonsillitis twice a year, almost like clockwork, from the age of 5 until 22. And that was when I was doing my second breathwork session at the age of 22. And I knew it was going to happen. I mean, I would have this tonsillitis, I'd have high fevers, I'd need to take huge amounts of penicillin. And I was in the middle of my second breathwork session when my throat just felt like it was on fire. And I thought, that's really interesting. I must be getting my usual case of tonsillitis, and I'd be sick for like a week in bed with high fevers and all of that. So in the session, though, my breath worker helped me get in touch with the emotional part of the burning in my throat. And I had the memory of feeling sad when I was a little girl that my parents were arguing, and I really wanted to tell them to stop, but I felt afraid to tell them. So I just swallowed it.
Hmm.
So in the session, I then told them, here, I'd like you to stop and our family could be so much happier. And I, like you, cried and I released. And at the end of the session, I didn't have a sore throat anymore. And I felt like what that session had been about was giving my authentic self more permission now to speak its truth, so to speak. But a year later, Lauren, I suddenly realized that I had not had tonsillitis that year, either
Wow.
of the two times. And I have never had tonsillitis since then. And it's been decades.
Wow.
But that was definitely an instantaneous healing. Another time when I was working with somebody, a woman who had grown up feeling very isolated in her family of origin, and she felt like she couldn't get contact enough with her father and her brothers and her mother. And she had an asthma attack at the age of 18 and was brought to intensive care unit. And they put her in a tent, with oxygen. And she remembers um, that she just felt incredibly isolated, like she had her whole life felt isolated, but now she was actually in a tent. And she cried and she begged people to please touch her, just put their hands in the tent and touch her, and they wouldn't. And she got through the experience, and they sent her home with all kinds of asthma medications. So she came to see me, and in her first session, all of the memory of that hospitalization and of her childhood came up, and there was crying and releasing and all of that. And as she was remembering the asthma attack, her lungs started getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And it was definitely quite a moment because I could
Hmm.
see that something was the body memory was physiologically manifesting. But the premise that we always use is as long as you can keep breathing, no matter what, whatever comes up, the healing is possible. And so somehow she just kept breathing. And even when it seemed like her lungs were just going to completely lock up in an asthmatic, it would have been an emergency. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, her lungs just released.
Wow.
She gasped and she started breathing deeper than she'd been able to breathe in years.
Wow.
And
Wow.
basically, over the next few months, she did some more work around that. She's never had to use an inhaler or any asthma medicine since that time. So that would be another example. To be honest, I've seen times when people could feel like a lump that was under their skin, for instance, and they knew they had already had it diagnosed, and in a session, the lump disappeared. I have actually
Wow.
felt this and seen this happen. Um, I've seen people who had arthritis feel like they were totally released from the pain that they were in, or partially released, but both can happen. So those are some of the physical things. And then emotionally, absolutely. I mean, I've seen people who, felt that they never could feel that they were deserving of anything good. And by the end of the session, they were just filled with joy and their arms open wide, and they knew they deserved a good life. And it completely altered the way that they lived. I've seen people who had anger with their parents, um, for, maybe a decade of just like constant anger and never being able to forgive. And in a breathwork session, they come to understand what was driving their parents, and they end up forgiving them, and the anger completely dissolved, never to come back. So I've seen these kinds of things. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Yeah, one of the things that fascinates me about the breath work is that there's so many different types. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in your book, for example, you mentioned five different groups, and let's see, potential, restoration, awareness, development, and therapeutic. And in each one of those groups, there's like 5 to 10 different types of breath work exercises that can support you in any one of those given groups. Um, I mean, how are there that many? I mean,
Oh,
so like what one basic thing is like, breathing through your nose versus breathing through your mouth. Is that, I assume that's some sort of fundamental difference in the way your body responds. And
mhm.
can you kind of speak on that a little bit?
Sure. So first of all, I should just say in the book, so the 5 or 10 examples that I give in each of those groups, those are just 5 or 10 examples. I mean, there are some of those groups have countless breathing. I wouldn't even begin to know how to, from all the different kinds of lineages there are,
Gotcha.
the Japanese lineages, the yogic lineages, the Sufi lineages, and then the modern emergent kind of understanding of breath work. So those are just, I was just giving examples in
Fair
each.
enough. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an interesting thing about the nasal breathing and the mouth breathing, and I really appreciate you bringing it up. We do know that in general, for a kind of maintenance way of living, breathing through the nose is likely the most healthy for everybody because
It's like a
you've got,
filter.
yep, you've got the natural filtering system
Mhm.
that you don't have through the mouth. You also have a greater ability to pick up nitric oxide in the nose, nasal passages,
Okay.
and nitric oxide helps the lungs open a little bit more. So that means you probably, in the long run, will be able to breathe more deeply. And we know from the book by James Nestor that came out in 2020 that, for instance, the indigenous Americans, a lot of those tribes really knew about the power and the importance of nasal breathing. So they actually taught their children to breathe through their nose. And,
Oh,
uh, there's a whole thing of like, it's somewhat, um, there's the evidence is somewhat equivocal, but there tends to be evidence that dentists are supporting now that breathing through the nose most of the time, it doesn't have to be every moment, but most of the time leads to better jaw development,
hmm.
and that for children, and that prevents certain illnesses or certain physiological ailments from happening. And when a child, for instance, is breathing a lot through their mouth, their jaw may not develop as much, or when an adult is breathing a lot through their mouth breathing, they may develop TMJ. So there are these different things that are known. But here's the interesting thing: our body is intelligent, and we can breathe through our mouth. So there must be a reason to breathe through the mouth, And what we've discovered is that, first of all, when you're exercising, initially you can get a little bit more energy, oxygen and energy by breathing through your mouth to your large muscles. So when you're wanting to get a lot of energy to your large muscles in the initial phase, perhaps of exercising, or let's say there's an emergency and you have to run at at really heightened speed, you might want to breathe through your mouth just initially because you're going to get more energy to those large muscles that need to move. Additionally, when you are experiencing a heightened emotional state that is transformative, like in a breathwork session where you're bringing consciousness, and there's that, for instance, there could be that sobbing that you're talking about. There could be laughing that's come out. Like, maybe as a child, your laughter quotient really went down because your parents always wanted you to be quiet. And so you stifled the joy too, and that could be coming out. Or just a kind of cosmic experience of the grief of life and the grief of the universe, and then also the cosmic experience of the joy of life and the possibilities of life. And so when we are having emergent experiences of parts of ourself that are emerging, it could be that we're going to need to or want to breathe through our mouth for the heightened energy that's going to come with that until we integrate it. And then we're going to want to breathe through our nose so that we can feel it in a kind of ordinary, everyday way. But it's not bad to breathe through the mouth. for in these kinds of situations, it could actually be really beneficial. It's just that you don't want to be breathing. So for breath work, certain kinds of breathing through the mouth is very beneficial. But for everyday breathing, we want to move ourselves towards breathing through our nose as much as possible.
Makes sense. So 3 times I have had what I believe is called tetany.
Mm,
Is that right?
yes.
Well, one first time I had it was actually at a past life regression, which is
Mm,
strange. Because I don't know, I may have been breathing hard, but I'm not conscious of that. The second time was definitely doing some breath work. And I, had that strange sensation in my hands. It's almost like pins and needles,
mhm,
very intense pins and needles, and then you almost get cramping in your hands.
mhm,
And then the third time I was in doing a cold plunge, and there
mhm.
was actual ice, like, and it was very cold. And there I was also breathing, really trying to maintain myself in hopes to stay in the cold water, right? And I had a very severe case of a tetany then as well. Um, why does that happen? Is it too much carbon monoxide in the body? Is it like what's taking place?
Well, there are a number of reasons actually that it can take place. And so let's talk about some of the physiological potentials of what causes it. And then
Okay.
let's talk about the psychological piece of why it can happen. But remembering that every breath is psychophysiological, so both are probably happening at the same time.
Hmm.
So, physiologically, the most common reason for tetany to happen is getting into a state of what I'm going to call unconscious hyperventilation. And so hyperventilation is when you're probably breathing very quickly. It's like hyper is more, hypo is less, or
Mhm.
hyper is amplified, and hypo is, kind of a deceleration. Um, so in hyperventilation, you're probably breathing faster, and you may be what we call over breathing too, which is that there's a kind of fear that has set in that you're not breathing enough. It might not be an emotional fear. It might be like literally a physiological, like there's just a lot of tension in the body, and it's like this wanting to get a breath. And so we might be blowing out our exhale more forcefully than is natural or healthy to do because we're wanting to get to that next inhalation more quickly. So it's kind of like we breathe in and then we want to get to that next inhalation because we feel like we don't have enough breath. So we go, so we can, and we're not doing it consciously, but it might land up that and what you're doing when that happens, what lands up happening is that you're blowing off carbon dioxide. And we actually need a certain amount of carbon dioxide in our blood to stimulate healthy inhalation. So when you start blowing off carbon dioxide, you're not going to have enough carbon dioxide after a while to want to breathe in or inhale normally. So you're going to get a kind of panicky, suffocating feeling, and your pH changes and your calcium changes. And this is a known, thing is that in hyperventilation or this tetany can arise where the tingling that you were talking about and the cramping because the pH has changed.
Hmm.
And that's very understandable. In a hospital, what they'll usually do is give you a brown paper bag,
Okay, right. Or a
to
glove.
or a
You breathe
glove,
into
like
a
you,
glove.
restore your carbon dioxide to get more carbon dioxide being inhaled again so that you've got it in your blood so that your breathing can slow down and you're not in a panic state. So sometimes when people are doing breath work, either the facilitator that they have isn't sort of skilled enough to keep them breathing in an even enough way, coach them to breathe in an even enough way that they're not blowing off their carbon dioxide, or there could be some kind of material coming up, some kind of intrapsychic material that could be like a painful memory. It could be repressed emotion. It could be a sense of excitement and energy and potential, but it's kind of like it scares you because you haven't allowed yourself to have that much before. And all of those things could cause somebody during a breathwork session to start to breathe faster and overbreathe. And that might cause that particularly tetany. Now, there are some other physiological reasons that can happen too, but that's the most common one.
Okay.
And generally, it can be rectified by simply um, guiding someone to relax their exhale instead of blowing it out, instead of blowing off that carbon dioxide, to relax their exhale so that they aren't blowing off excess carbon dioxide and that ratio is getting more balanced again. However, there's also a psychological component because, we said you could be having these different things come up and it could be causing you to panic or to feel like something's wrong or you want to get through something. Let me break through to the other side. And so a lot of times what I find with that tetany starting is that there are um, repressed expressions of connection. So one of my favorite things to do with people, if their hands are kind of clamping up a little bit and they're not responding yet, to just slow your exhale down, relax it, is I'll say to them, if there was anybody that you would want to connect with in the world right now, they could either be alive or they could be on the other side, who would it be? And they'll say who that is. And then I say, reach your hands out to them and tell them, explain that you want this connection. And the emotional release that happens when people do
Mm.
that is incredible. And the hands will start to clear. They'll become like rays of the sun instead of like, clods, so to speak. And then they realize that this energy that they've been feeling, which they've maybe been frightened of, is actually life force. And they start letting the life force really move through them and kind of saying yes to it. And so there, these psychological reasons can cause the tetany too. We can also be having a memory of our birth. Now, a lot of little babies at birth are born with their hands kind of doing that because there's probably a physiological reason that I have to admit I don't know, but I think at a psychological level, there's just so much change going on. And there's like, if the birth is not very graceful for some reason, there can be some tension. So these are some of the reasons that tetany happen, but I can tell you that it's always an invitation to say yes to a greater degree of life force. And I've actually had students that had tetany, and after about 6 or 7 sessions, they stopped having it because they had opened up to a greater amount of life force flowing through them.
Wow.
And so their body wasn't resisting it anymore when it happened or afraid of it when it happened. And they started missing it. They'd be like, I want that to happen again. I was like, well, but you're already living with greater life force. But,
That's so
they
cool.
just, yeah. So it's not something to
Hmm.
be afraid of. The only thing to know is that it's good to have a well-trained breath worker with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the first time I did it, I was actually, you were talking about like a life force. I was actually holding on to a shaft of life, a
Mm-hmm.
light,
Mm-hmm.
and
In that
and
past life memory, that
yeah,
past,
in that past life memory,
yeah.
and it was so intense. And that's the first time that it happened. So I was like, "What the hell is going on?" On top of just like the state that I happen to be in, experiencing all of this. Um, but yeah, it's a very unusual sensation. I appreciate you. I figured if anybody knew, it would be you, and you do. Thank you. So, well, let's see, what else do I have? I have so many different questions here. I've talked to a number of people. I haven't experienced this myself that say that breath work is can mirror or seem like you're on like a psychedelic journey,
Yeah.
and I think that's very cool. I'd love to hear a little bit about that, and kind of in layman's terms. Why does this happen, and how can it be helpful?
Uh, okay. Well, first of all, we're beginning to get some research, some evidence coming back about that. There have been two studies. I know the first one came out in November or December of 2023 from the Netherlands, and then another one has come out since then. Small studies, about 25 to 30 people, but that's still significant,
Hmm.
that have shown that people doing now you were sharing with our listeners that in the book I break it down into five different groups of breath work, with one of them, group five, being what I call human potential or potential. And that's that deeper kind of breath work that you and I keep talking about here.
I see.
That's really the the permission for the person to feel their authentic self and their full life force in an atmosphere in which they're being supported and really truly unconditionally loved. And so that kind of breath work, group five, is known. There are many different schools of it. Some of the names that people might be familiar with are integrative breath work, which is what I tend to call it, therapeutic breath work, transformational breath, holotropic breathing, liberation breathing. A lot of people have called it rebirthing breath work or conscious connected breathing. And so that conscious connected breathing has been studied twice, um, and compared to a control group that's using psychedelics. And in both studies, it came out that the conscious connected breathing produced equivalent or greater than expanded or psychedelic states. I would call it
Wow.
expanded states of consciousness
Makes
than
sense. Yeah.
psychedelics, but without the side effects, right?
Right.
So a very interesting thing. Plus, you learn how to do it from within yourself, and so you're not dependent at that point. And I'm not knocking that psychedelics has been very helpful for many, many people, particularly some people suffering from trauma. However, I dream of a world where everybody has access and have had the experience of the power of their own breathing, the transformative power of it, and that they could access those states themselves. You know, what we know, if I would say it in just a simple way scientifically, is that during psychedelic journeys and during flow states. This happens in flow states that could be about athletics, could be about art, could be about even stock market brokers or magicians. And certainly, we think this is happening with conscious breathing and breath work. Is that we get what's called transient hypofrontality, which hypo again means the deceleration or the turning down of something. And so transient hypofrontality is when we enter a state where the neocortex is less activated and the limbic brain, which is where a lot of the emotions and memory and right brain stuff gets, the thalamus, gets processed. And so in a state of transient hypofrontality, there's also a lot of brainwave changes there. We have access to a greater degree of our emotional and right brain intuitive understanding. And so that's what's happening scientifically with both psychedelics and breath work. But I love that these two studies have come out showing equivalent or greater than effect
That's
with,
amazing.
yeah.
Wow. So the other thing is that, oh, so anxiety.
Mm,
So I get anxious. Most people do. I get it a lot. And I find that when I am anxious, when I have anxiety taking place, I generally am not breathing.
mm-hmm,
And it's a little baffling to me. So, when I recognize that I'm in kind of a funky spot, I will do breathing exercises. No particular type, just
mm-hmm,
deep inhales and nice, slow, deep exhales, and just try and oxygenate my body, get me out of this particular state. And it's a little ironic. I feel like it should be built into the body system that when we get into a state of anxiety, that rather than stop breathing, which I feel like a lot of us do when we get into that state, um, I feel like we should have this automatic system set up where we actually start breathing to keep us out of that place.
mm-hmm.
Um, let's see, what was my question? That may have just been a statement of observation.
Observation.
So But why is it when people are anxious, they often are shallow breathing? And why is that response such a common occurrence? Yeah, I guess it's more of an observation. And is there a particular breath exercise that you would recommend when you realize that you are in that particular state?
Yes, there is. And first of all, I will try to just offer something in terms of the question you were just sort of posing to the universe.
Yes.
Why does this happen?
Yeah, it's
Uh,
strange.
yes, it's very strange, isn't it? And I think that in many ways, the question that you're posing really is a wonderful doorway, Lauren, to being able to talk about the pivotal, intrinsic, reciprocal relationship between breathing and presence, between breathing and consciousness or awakened consciousness, if you want to say that. Because what happens in anxiety is that we're no longer present. We're not really present with what's happening. We're reacting to what's happening. We've become, we are surmising that something that we are imagining or something that is happening is unsafe, is and it's producing fear, and we're not actually staying present with how we can take action to change that thing. And so you can see that if we were conscious, if we were really conscious, if we were really present, we would simply relate to what's happening, no matter how challenging it might be. You know the difference in a movie, for instance, of the scary something is happening and one person is present and doing whatever they can, and another person's freaking out and screaming. And of course, we can understand why somebody's freaking out and screaming. And we might all, most of us do that. However, there's some person there that's not doing that. They're staying present and they're taking whatever action they can to protect themselves or their family or to maybe get the monster diverted or whatever it may be. So there's definitely a correlation between awakeness or presence, consciousness, and breathing. And I think that our journey in life is really about how we can embody awakening. That class that you took at the Inspiration Consciousness School is named Awakening. How can we embody awakening in every moment with whatever is happening? Now, when you get into a fear state with the anxiety, you're not present anymore. And the reason, and the body doesn't just naturally breathe. It tries to probably, but it loses the battle at some point, if that's where you've gotten to in the state of anxiety. Because I think the purpose of our life is to become more conscious, to be awakened, to embody consciousness in action. And it's not just automatically given to us. That's something we have to actually cultivate. That's what this journey is about. Like, how do I become love? How do I become awakening? How do I become consciousness itself? Um, so we do have to intervene when it gets to the point where we're unconsciously fearful and we've become anxious and we're not breathing and we're not present. And I think a lot of people might think that just any deep breathing at that point would break the state of anxiety, but that it isn't really true, because that's that's a survival state, that gets triggered. And so a lot of people will find that if they just breathe deeply, they don't get the movement out of the anxiety as quickly as they might like. There was a study done at Stanford with Doctors Spiegel, Huberman, and a bunch of other people, a team, and they were comparing box breathing, which is breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, hold for 4, breathe in for 8, hold for 8. It's equivalent 4 different of breathing in, holding, breathing out, and holding. They were comparing box breathing, cyclical hyperventilation, which is the conscious, faster breathing, which is different than the unconscious hyperventilation. Conscious faster breathing, like the Wim Hof people, Tumo, some of those tend to do, where you breathe quickly 5 or 10 times, and you might take in a deep breath and retain it for a moment and then let it out and then go back into the fast cycle. That's very powerful for altered states or expanded states of consciousness. And then they were comparing this to other breath, which I'm about to teach you. And what they found was that the breath I'm about to teach you, 5 minutes of it had more rapid and powerful change in anxiety. Anxiety levels went down more than with box breathing or with cyclical hyperventilation.
Wow.
Moreover, if you did this breathing for 5 minutes a day for 30 days, then you got an overall trend of lowering of anxiety and then, much to their surprise, elevating of mood. So it had an antidepressant effect um, a lowering of anxiety. And it's a very simple breathing technique. You inhale, deep breath with the mouth closed through the nose. And then before you breathe out, you take another little sip of air in through the nose. So it's kind of like you're breathing in two segments of breath, one longer one, and then a little cap off the top there. So, and then for breathing out, you breathe out through the mouth, interestingly, and you sigh. So the breathing might be something like this. And 5 minutes of that lowered anxiety better than the other two. 5 minutes a day created a kind of a trait change where there was just less anxiety in general in your life and better mood.
Well, thank you for sharing that. One of my questions was if there was one breath work exercise that you recommend, which one would you recommend? And I think that would be the one that I would want.
That's the one that you
So,
want because you have anxiety. However,
yes,
let me just offer something else to you and to everyone
perfect.
else.
Yes.
That's an intervention and a corrective experience. So we would say that's a group 3 breath work, which is the therapeutic effects. However, what is it that you're going to want for breath work that is going to maintain presence, going to maintain integration, going to maintain regulation, going to maintain contact with your deeper self, your more real self. And that technique that I just taught you would not be the one that you would do that for.
Okay.
After you do your 5 minutes, then what you might want to try doing is what I learned as matrika pranayam. Now, matrika means the mother of mothers in Sanskrit. And in our modern culture, we have something called coherent breathing, which has been studied quite a bit. And I know the founder of it, Stephen Elliott, he's quite an amazing human being. And that is essentially that for most people, now it's a bell curve, so it's not true for everybody, but the majority of people breathing somewhere between 5 and 6 breaths a minute is the most resonant kind of breathing that they can breathe for optimal heart rate variability and other physiological functions. So a lot of people love doing coherent breathing. There are tapes with a bell that goes off every 6 seconds or 5 seconds so that you change your inhale and your exhale, or a wave that comes in for the inhale and a wave that goes out. And it's very effective. Although, as I've said, some people, that same state, they're going to want to breathe more like 3 or 4 breaths a minute, and some it's going to be like 7 or 8 breaths a minute. So there is some variation. What I came to learn from early on in my yogic training, and Stephen Elliott, the founder of Coherent Breathing, has actually validated this when we've talked about it, is that what's really the key here is that the inhale and the exhale are at equivalent amounts of time. The body loves the regularity. The body, then you've got sympathetic and parasympathetic having an equivalent time, which is what you really want to have happen. You've got, all the physiological processes that happen during inhale having the same amount of time as all the physiological processes that happen of exhale. And so you can do coherent breathing, 5 to 6 breaths a minute, or you can simply breathe deeply to find the rate of breath at that time, because it'll be different every day. That what is the amount of time for you to inhale that would be the equivalent amount of time to exhale? And so you can either breathe in and kind of count to that and then try to adjust the exhale to be that same amount, or you can exhale and count that and then try to have the inhale be half of the, I mean, not half, but the same amount of time. And honestly, I'm really sincerely saying this to you. Matrika pranayam practiced for 7 minutes or more a day is going to give you more long-term benefit in terms of regulation, integration, and presence than almost any other thing that I know in the breathwork world. I mean, really
Oh,
anything.
okay.
The anxiety one that I taught you, that's really good for an intervention, though.
I do a fair amount of Reiki work.
Mm,
And when I work with others, um, again, I'm kind of circling back around. I do focus on the breath, although I don't have a particular practice. When you're, um, when you're working like doing energy work, energy medicine, is there a particular type of breath work exercise that you might recommend for someone like myself?
beautiful question. So, I would say maybe two things to really consider. So, one would be matrika pranayam, because if you can be in that regulated, optimal functioning state while you're doing Reiki, that's going to help you stabilize, remain embodied, not get pulled into the other person's energy field, which, can happen
Mhm.
occasionally. But also, it's going to offer to the person that you're working on just this presence of this beautiful, awakened, regulated, integrative energy. So I think that's an absolute game changer for any kind of
Wonderful.
energetic medicine. And I would highly encourage you to practice it both just on your own, 7 minutes or more at a time, and then start to try it when you're actually doing Reiki with other people. The other thing that's really occurring to me are the group 4 practices. And those practices have to do with human development. How is it, for instance, that we might want to develop our capacity for joy, our capacity for depth, our capacity for energy, our capacity for beauty, our capacity for focus, our capacity for love, all of these compassion, equanimity, all of these various kinds of human attributes that are so desirable. And there are so many breathing techniques, so much breath work that will help with those. So, for instance, let's say that you're wanting to learn more about focus, you're wanting to embody focus more. Well, it's true that you can just do matrika and long, slow, deep inhales and exhales and pay attention to the breathing, be mindful with it, and that will help increase your focus. But it's also true that there could be a breathing technique, for instance, where you might breathe in with a kind of uh, strength and power and intentionality stronger than you would normally breathe. So you're not breathing a slow, deep inhale. It's like you're sipping through a straw. You might go, and you might focus on the center of your brain and have the feeling that this breath, you're like really focusing on awareness. And then on the exhale, you might breathe out slowly and allow the sense of all that energy that has accumulated in the center of your head to kind of emanate outwards beyond your skull and brain into the world so that you have greater awareness of what's going on around you. I mean, that's just one example.
Oh,
Are, I mean, people create these things all the time because there are different Every person's an individual, and what works for one person wouldn't work for another. But some of these techniques are like, for instance, Tonglen, that the Buddhists have been doing for a long time, is a really powerful uh, breathing meditation that develops compassion and capacity to be present to suffering. And in that breathing technique, you breathe in slowly and deeply the suffering or the pain of another. And you imagine it as a kind of a tarry black substance that you're breathing into your body, and you're transmuting it in your own body through your presence and through the breath, and it becomes something beautiful. And then you slowly breathe it out and give this beauty to the world, and then you take in some more suffering. I mean, these are just two very small examples. I think for Reiki, any any way that you can develop deeper capacities as a human, an awake human being, as a present human being, is going to help the quality of your Reiki with other people.
Beautiful. Thank you. So as we start approaching the end of our discussion, I do have a couple questions that I wanted to run by you. But before I did that, I wanted to see if there's, anything you wanted to just kind of speak on, really want to drive home, summary point, highlight point, something you'd like to share.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Thank you so much, Lauren. I think there are two things I'd like to quickly share. The first is that every person who's listening to this, you are essence incarnate. You are love incarnate. You are potential incarnate. And whatever you've experienced, whatever beauty, whatever support, whatever empathy and compassion from others, whatever pain, whatever suffering, whatever trauma you've experienced, please do not compare your life to anybody else's. You are a, a beautiful mystery, and even the pain that you carry is a doorway to some kind of wisdom. And so I would just encourage you not to think of breath work as getting you to be a certain kind of person, like a better person, but more that breath work is the support. It's the essential medicine and nutrient for the completely original and authentic wisdom that only you can carry to become more accessible to you and more able to be shared with the rest of the world as a contribution. And the second thing that I would say, Lauren, is that breathing is the unifying medicine, it's the unifying language of the human species. It's actually the unifying language of the whole planet. Oxygen is our greatest element, our most common element on this planet, and it runs through everything, every animal, creature, plant, mushroom, the mycelium, the land, the waters, the air, the heat sources. And so when we breathe consciously, first of all, just even literally, let alone metaphorically, something else is breathing out, many other things are breathing out. And when we breathe, exhale, many other things are inhaling. But even greater than that, we are participating each breath that we do consciously. We are participating in the one breath that is going on, the big cycle of breathing that's photosynthesis and land formation and, plant growth and all of that. And I think that to really appreciate that, to spend some time breathing every day where we feel that oneness, that belonging to that larger cycle than just ourselves, is one of the great promises of breath work, of how it could really contribute to a culture of more love, a culture of more creativity, a culture of more cooperation, of more appreciation. And that is, I think, one of the great promises of breath work getting integrated more deeply into the human experience.
beautiful. I love it. What is one thing, if everyone knew or recognized, that it would change the world?
Mm. I think if everyone recognized that we're all born with a desire to love and to be love, we would have more reverence and respect for each person and have more understanding that when they manifest in ways that are distressing to us or that cause us pain or that are clearly unconscious, that it's all because somehow their innate desire to love and to be loved has gotten thwarted. And
Hmm.
that it would be very powerful for all of us to figure out how we could support individuals in reclaiming or rediscovering I mean, that's what happened to you on that very first breathwork session you had,
Yes.
ex-wife, tension, whatever. You have all this letting go and you reach out to her in love, basically
Hmm.
love for her and love for your child that you would want them to have. And so it's natural. It's inside of all of us. And I think if we could really appreciate that, we would all want to learn more ways to manifest that in the way that we are with other people.
Nice. If you could compress your understanding of the healing arts into one piece of wisdom, what would it be?
That our body, heart, mind, spirit wants to be well, wants to be whole. Well can be defined a lot of different ways, but it wants to be whole. It wants to be um, fully expressed. It wants to be vibrant. And I think the healing arts, at the core of most of them, if not all of them, is an understanding that if the person could tap into that intrinsic capacity, wisdom that's in there for wholeness, a lot of things, a lot of healing could take place that doesn't even seem possible, but it can. Yeah.
What's one question you wish more people would ask about spirituality and the healing arts?
Hmm. How can I utilize spiritual practice and the healing arts to awaken my capacity for love, creativity, and contribution to this world?
Beautiful. Where can people get a copy of your book?
Oh, well, I know it's on Amazon, so that's one place, and some people may or may not want to use Amazon, so barnesandnobles.com as well. You can also go to Norton Publishers, www.norton.com, and you'll find it there, Breathwork and Psychotherapy, Clinical Applications for Healing and Transformation. And I'm sure that it's going to be in many bookstores too. I hope.
Wonderful. And how can people get in touch with you or your programs and inquire about all the wonderful things that you do?
Thank you, Lauren. Um, our website is www.inspirationcommunity, just like those two words are spelled, .org. So inspirationcommunity.org. Our website is, we're launching a new website on August 26th, on the same day that the book is launching. Um, and you can also write to me and our office for all kinds of information by using the email essence, ESSENCE, essence at inspirationcommunity.org.
Fantastic. Jessica, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so very much for being a part of this.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation and journey that we took together, Lauren. I really feel like we were sailing on an ocean of consciousness together, and I appreciated many of your questions.
Thank you.